This is Futurebuilders podcast, and I'm your host, Teemu Uotila. I'm an enthusiastic future explorer working with a Finnish tech company. Together with my guests, we are building the future today. Are you in? This is Futurebuilders podcast with Rene Amador, AR Evangelist in Hollywood, filmmaker, CEO and co-founder of ARwall. Together with him, we'll be finding out: how will stories be told in the future? What's the role of AR for future generations? How will augmented reality change movie making in the future? Rene, please give us a short introduction of yourself and the idea and concept behind ARwall.
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I can tell you about ARwall. So this is an augmented reality tool that we're creating for the motion picture effects industry. As you mentioned, it's for filmmakers. We're trying to kill green screen. So traditionally, if you want to make an actor look like they're standing somewhere where they're not actually standing, you use green screen, and we call this virtual production. And this system has basically been used for over 30 years, and we're trying to create something better. And we think augmented reality is the way to do this. And as far as my background, I am super weird. I worked at my first startup when I was 10 years old. My father started a personal finance software company, creating software for the Commodore Amiga way back in the day.
Oh,
yeah.
those were the good old times. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is just for people who don't know. Commodore Amiga was kind of like the big PC brand before like Apple and Windows came along, or rather before Mac OS came along, and all these other well, basically like Windows 95 and everything came out. I think the year after we founded this company.
Yeah.
So I helped a lot with the marketing, and I continued to do that. I've worked for 16 startups at this point. Most of them have been tech startups. Quite a few were also media. And it ultimately culminated in me founding my own digital agency and commercial production company. That was in 2009. I founded that with a couple of my friends from film school. And we were very successful in that. This was back in the day before influencers, when people were just beginning to think about web video. So we were very successful in that web video space. And then doing that, I directed basically every single video that we made at the agency. That ended up being over 350 commercials, short films, and basically pilots and that type of stuff, and overwhelmingly for tech companies and media companies to do that. So that means that I have a little bit of experience in tech, a little bit of experience in actually creating content. That's why I'm here in this role, basically trying to use tech to help content creators do something special and different.
Yeah. What's your passion? What drives you? Is it always the new technology, or something else, some creative stuff, or do you have specific agendas in that respect?
Yeah. So I think I'm a storyteller basically, by background. I think when I was a kid, I was always drawing pictures and, telling little stories, making little booklets and comic books and stuff like that. And then when I realized I could create videos, that's the rest is history at that point. It kind of just went off and just did that for over 10 years. So storytelling is a big thing for me. And what I guess what I mean by that is helping people structure reality, the events that are occurring. Whoop. Oh, let me catch that.
No worries.
Basically, storytelling to me is a way of adding meaning to the world and trying to organize the world in such a way that makes sense to us, right? And that's a continual thing, and that's a huge passion for me. But I think my dad is an entrepreneur, and my mom as well. It's loud. Okay. And so both my parents are entrepreneurs, and they really put into me a sense of like optimism about human potential and the ability to create new things and better things. And I think that has gone along with me into the technology world and into thinking about how do we actually give people more freedom, more abilities to do what they want to do, and to explore the things that they want to explore. And for me, that's always been about filmmaking and storytelling. So
Yeah.
at this point, I'm combining these two passions together. How do we create something for the future that gives people more freedom, and specifically for filmmakers and other creators? So yeah, I mean that's really what drives me. I see creativity as one of the most noble things that people can do. So I really I really value creators, and I try to help them out as much as I can.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I mean, the storytelling in itself, it's a hard job because the communication is very difficult. Getting the right kind of message abroad in short amount of time, it takes it takes a lot of effort, and it's very long process to keep things simple, so to speak. So do you want to sort of like when talking about storytelling and communication, do you want to streamline the message, or do you want to create these meaningful stories all around, or do you just want to simplify the world around them?
Yeah. I think for me, like people have the creativity inside them. So they generally don't need help with that part. What they need help with is expressing it and getting it out, and actually actualizing that either into a piece of work or some type of expression or something like that. And I think that's where the real challenge is. Human creativity is an endless font, right?
Yeah.
And the more you create, the better that you get at it. So how do we get that type of math working in our favor so that we're getting better content and everything like that? That's what I start thinking about. Is how to put these tools in the hands of more people, because like nowadays, especially in filmmaking, if you have that $100 million budget or up, um, you're okay. You're doing okay. It's everybody that's working with less, that is having the trouble. So as far as storytellers, that's what matters to me. As far as audiences and what they're getting out of the story, I think if we put the tools in more people's hands, I think that people are going to get stories that they've never heard before, that they've never experienced before, maybe from perspectives that they've never gotten. And I think so. Like diversity is another huge component of what we're trying to do with building these types of tools.
Yeah. If you look at the current landscape in AR, what are the most interesting things you see happening nowadays? Interesting products or interesting use cases when it comes to AR?
Yeah. Well, I think right now it's the most interesting that AR has ever been, because we're actually beginning to see stuff. I think, everybody knows Pokemon Go and, the AR capture feature on that game, which is pretty cool, and I think was one of the most successful ways of getting the word augmented reality out there for people to begin thinking about. But I mean, of course, as far as interesting, I mean, gosh, you got to look at Magic Leap and what they're doing. I mean, their story alone, as far as the company, the money that they've raised, and then the press that they've gotten. I think it's a very interesting story as a microcosm of AR and VR in general. If you think of the overhype, and then the crushing realization of reality, and then maybe a glimmer of hope once people actually start getting their hands on it and start getting a sense of reality there. So I think that's some of the most interesting stuff that's being done, Magic Leap. But then I think the stuff that Apple, Google, Snap are pushing in mobile is very, very interesting. And I think that people who talk about AR as being a mobile-based thing are probably correct for the near term. It's looking very interesting, and myself, I do, with my friends, I can waste hours on the phone, on the camera app, just messing with the different filters and stuff like that. So I think just as a way to get people familiar with what augmented reality is, mobile is awesome. I think Magic Leap is doing some really, really interesting stuff in headsets. But I can't. I mean, I can't. I can't pass up the opportunity to talk about the stuff that's not happening in mobile and not happening on headsets, which is what ARwall, what we're super interested in, basically large scale augmented reality. So for people that might not be familiar with that, you can think of these holographic performers that have been kind of popping up here and there, like Michael Jackson, Roy Orbison.
Yeah.
Recently did something. So this type of stuff is kind of the stuff that seems interesting to me, which is like basically looking at something with your naked eye, right, and not having to wear any headset or have a phone fixed in front of you. I think this stuff is really interesting because when people think about holographic displays and holograms and that type of stuff, that's super exciting. To think that you could have the sense of something that's not there actually being there, and I think this is more the direction that I think audiences and consumers might be interested in seeing augmented reality move into. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm interested in. Is I want to see those huge Blade Runner advertisements, right? Where some type of awesome spokesperson, idol, or whatever, like dancing around or something. I mean, how would that even work? We're beginning to actually solve those types of problems and try to look at those types of challenges right now.
Yeah, I think it was in Back in the Future 2, part 2, where they did this AR in future, and that was I think that was the first touch that I got this AR concept.
Oh, you're talking about the Jaws 3D or whatever that comes down to buy him. Yeah, that was pretty cool.
That's the first example. But if you think about movies themselves, do you see that AR will change the movie experience? Let's say that you wouldn't need to go to a movie theater in order to experience a movie. So it would, it could happen in the real world, combining AR and these holograms.
I mean, to some extent, we're already seeing that with VR films. So to be clear, there's been a couple types of VR. There's been VR games, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, which is basically interactive stuff. But then there's also recently there's been coming up some VR films, which is more like what you would traditionally think of, like I'm a passive observer. I'm kind of as I move around or change my observation point, then the story moves forward, and maybe I'm compelled to move to different places, and that helps the story move forward. So that's what VR film has been doing, and these are generally completely CG real-time environments that you're wandering through and stories that you're seeing with characters and all of it happening in real time, obviously. So I think that space is interesting, and I think when filmmakers think of AR and VR, they're probably thinking of, oh, I'm going to be telling narrative linear stories over here in a real-time kind of environment where the user has a little bit more control over, obviously, perspective and everything like that, the flow and pacing of the story, but that it's essentially still linear for the most part. But what we're seeing is that kind of traditional way of looking at VR is changing now. Now people are beginning to look at AR as creating larger kind of world scale opportunities for larger stories that maybe occur over months. And so I think it's a really different way of thinking about storytelling.
Yeah, so it's more immersive in that way.
Yes, very much so. So I think some of the early stuff that we were seeing was world scale AR. And what I mean by world scale is basically this means that very much like Pokemon Go, where there's an entire world map and then there's different key like hot areas where you can trigger different things happening in the AR ecosystem or environment or whatever you want to call it. So basically going to a certain place, taking a certain action either on your phone or on a headset or something like that, and then moving on to the next part of the story. That kind of stuff is starting to get very interesting, and I'm seeing a lot more of that coming up with even in some cases with brands getting involved, and then I think the other component here is At ARwall, we're creating filmmaking tools that actually change the way that the processes of filmmaking go and the processes of storytelling can go. And one of the key ways that we're doing this is taking a lot of the work that's done with CG in post production and moving that into pre production and production, so that those CG elements can actually be involved earlier, and the artists that create these can actually be involved in the production, working with the director. So that converts into cost savings and then also time savings for the filmmaker. So that's the part that we're interested in, is actually moving the needle on production tools. But I think there's production tools, there's different ways of telling stories, there's larger ways of telling stories, and then for filmmakers that maybe want to do something a little bit more traditional, like narrative filmmaking, there's still those VR films that I think are going to become more popular.
Yeah. How do you see Hollywood embracing this? Are they ready for it? Do they want it, or is it an uphill battle and you need to explain it to them? What are the possibilities in AR?
Sure. So Hollywood's funny, right? They're very traditional, but there's actually there's a way to get into Hollywood with new technology, which is that if you say, "Hey, I can do something for your marketing," that's where a lot of traction seems to happen. So if you remember, I think when internet video first came out, the way that Hollywood ended up using this was, oh, now we can put our trailer online. Now we can put we can put a little short online to promote what the movie is doing. And so they definitely thought of the new technology as a marketing and promotions tool first. And I think that's still the case with a lot of emerging tech. So of course you see stuff like the Alien series coming out with some VR experiences, Blade Runner, as well as a bunch of other ones. Now you're even starting to see like the superhero brands like Spider-Man and Justice League and that type of stuff having VR experiences. But they're still mostly for the most part promotional pieces, meaning that you're not actually, it's not meant to be an actual like AAA piece of content that you're playing. And in some cases, it is quite polished. I invite people to go and look at some of the ones that were nominated for the Emmys. Especially, I am a TV Academy member, so I was able to look at all these and actually vote
Yeah.
on these. But there's some amazing stuff that came out this past year, and I think that's one of the ways that Hollywood is thinking about it. I think at ARwall we've been very lucky to get them to start thinking about these as things that actually occur in production. Because in these studios, the marketing teams and the production teams are very different. There's totally different people. So we've had to had all these conversations, again and again with these different teams. And I think luckily we're seeing on the production side, especially with some of the major studios that really have a lot to gain from cutting down some of these costs, that they're interested in these types of tools.
Yeah. Well, we all hear stories that Hollywood is very rough for actors, but is it same if you're a tool provider or content provider? Do you still have similar struggles to get in?
Sure. Luckily, I think in Hollywood it's always about scarcity, right? How scarce is this level of talent, this type of person? Um, so actors are very plentiful in LA and in Hollywood. I think that's common knowledge.
Yeah. Actor
So
slash waiter. I think that's the most one.
actor/waiter, yeah. I mean that's the general joke that in the industry. Um, but I think we're lucky in that there's not many companies like us out there, particularly working on new production tools. Particularly, I mean, we get to say cheaper, better, faster. That's something that not a lot of people get to say, and we've been very lucky in that sense. So I think for a tech company, it's a little bit easier. When we competed in the South by Southwest Accelerator, which we won top AR/VR startup of 2018, there was a few other augmented reality tools there that were specifically for filmmakers, which was very interesting. So I think Hollywood is actually maybe one of the most hospitable places for this type of technology right now, compared to all the other industries that are out there. Obviously, mobile is doing hot on marketing. It's doing hot, but I think Hollywood is really open to these types of tools, because they don't want the same thing to happen that has recently happened, in streaming, in internet. They want to avoid that. So VR AR is their next shot at making sure that they can avoid that and use the new technology for the better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the problem with AR and VR until this point has been that no one has really know how to monetize that. That's it. You can have nice things, but are people willing to pay for those? That's a different discussion. But like you said, if cheaper, better, faster, yeah, that's definitely a selling angle for all the filmmakers and studios.
Yeah.
Regarding the future of AR, how do you see it if you go forward 5 years or 10 years? Do you see changing much, or are there big things going to happen in that field that we can't yet even think of?
Yeah, I think we're already seeing that it's probably not going to go. It's not going to unfold the way that we probably expect. I think that's safe to say. The stuff on mobile is very interesting, but it's immediately becoming a casual oriented type of space, and I think that when you talk to AR and VR companies in general nowadays, there's so many of them that I'm talking to that are basically just dumping their consumer strategy, and it's really sad to see. There's some major headset companies, both in VR and AR, and then some major content creators in VR and AR that raise financing and build these incredible teams on the premise that they were going to be making consumer plays. They're going to be making awesome productivity tools and games and that type of stuff. And then as the market fell out for the headsets, they're all pivoting towards enterprise. And I think that what you're probably going to see in the next 5 years is a lot of companies that have done a lot of interesting stuff in enterprise beginning to pool their inventions and the incredible stuff that they've made down to consumer again, and trying again to go, hey, I built something incredible for our enterprise clients, for these large corporations, and now this is going to start to filter down into the consumer. So I think a lot of people thought that it was going to start in consumer and then float upwards, but we're really seeing it being an enterprise play at the moment.
Yeah.
Which means that whenever an industry goes heavy into enterprise, what that means is that we begin to develop stuff that isn't necessarily for the consumer, right? And so that can go in an interesting direction, because you start to be able to develop in odd, weird directions that consumers wouldn't necessarily ask for. So when these tools start coming back to you, 5 years from now, you might start seeing really weird stuff like different types of sensors that are very, very tiny. I'm talking like a speck of dust.
Yeah.
And then you might also start seeing optical displays that seem to be virtual displays in themselves, meaning that you're looking at a virtual screen and you're not wearing a headset, and it seems to be a deep, convincing 3D environment or space inside the screen that you can manipulate and that type of thing. So those are the types of things that enterprise customers are asking for. So that's what a lot of money is getting dumped into. And I think on top of that, all sorts of Internet of Things starting to get integrated into augmented reality. So you start to being able to control different appliances in your home. Let's say your temperature, your oven, your refrigerator, your TV, all with augmented reality. So basically, starting to get rid of touch displays, starting to get rid of buttons, which is a really weird thing to think about. Not having a button, purchasing let's say a thermostat, not having a button, or purchasing a TV and not having a button. you can start to think of those types of things beginning to happen. And then I'd also point out that because of the enterprise focus, you're going to see a lot of productivity tools. So things like AR typing, AR, video chatting, whatever that might be. AR Excel, I can't even imagine what that would be. But for all those Excel jockeys out there, look forward to some type of AR version of spreadsheets, conceivably, or data sets, or databases or something. I have no idea what this stuff is going to look like, but I already know that these questions are being asked.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a data scientist, then like you mentioned, AR could actually provide you good amount of extra value in your work. So that's an interesting area. I never thought about it.
Exactly.
Yeah, you said getting rid of these physical interfaces. That's always nice, but people like physical things. Don't you think that's going to be a hard sell for the consumers, that they aren't able to be touching anything?
Well, I do not subscribe to the physical value thing. So I still have friends that collect Blu-rays. Some very, very good friends that even work in tech and still collect Blu-rays and that type of stuff. So I don't understand it. I am not that guy. I'm not the vinyl guy. As you might imagine, for me being the head of an AR company, I'm not the I don't value physical, tangible things as much as other people, I imagine. So I think, I began to sell my DVD collection like 5 years ago. And then even began to start giving it away, just because I wanted less clutter and less stuff.
Yeah, and I think no one will pay anymore for DVDs. Only like $1 per DVD.
Exactly. But that said, whenever I have gifted a DVD to someone, it is an amazing experience of actually tangibly handing it to them and having a little discussion, about it. So I think people are always going to value, that kind of the tangibility of things, because it's physical. That means you can gift it to another person, which is always interesting. You can have a multi-person interaction with it. Like if you take away the buttons off of the TV, and there's no remote or anything like that, then how do I pass the remote to you, right? What happens to that social interaction? I think those types of things are interesting challenges for AR, but I think you as users, you're going to be asked to make those types of leaps, and maybe you're going to say, no, I don't want to do that, and we'll have to adjust and figure out what to do. But yeah, I think users are gonna start to be asked to think about what additional types of interfaces they're willing to use.
And if you think about the AR and AR in advertisement, how do you see that changing? Because when talking about future, I always like to reference Minority Report, since that movie got so many things right. I don't know if it's self-proclaiming prophecy or what, but there are a lot of things that they said will come and has already happened or are happening. So how do you see advertisement? Is it something like in Minority Report or in Blade Runner, for instance?
I think there's definitely a future where we do begin to see that type of stuff, where it's highly customized, basically AI, augmented reality AI or CG AI talking to you as if they were an individual and you were an individual. I think that type of world is closer than people might imagine. And as far as the fidelity of the technology and the sophistication of the technology, I think that's also developing more rapidly than people think. I think that particularly Minority Report, when you start to think about the instances where he's walking by an advertisement, it takes a snapshot ID of who he is, conceivably his face or his eyes. I think in that case it's his eyes. But I think it more properly would be your face, or even be the mobile phone in your pocket. Yeah. That your mobile phone would be saying, here I am, I'm Rene over here. And then for brands that I had already verified or already somehow authorized, it would be able to say, hey, there's Rene walking by. I'm going to go ahead and give a a delivered personal ad to him, telling him like, "Hey, how was that vacation last week? You're back now. Why don't you get this new productivity software or something like that?" Maybe something like that. And I think that that's very, very close. I think maybe within 5 years, honestly. And we're already beginning to see that type of thing in Asia. I think WeChat came out with informational kiosks that there's a facial ID that logs you into WeChat that allows you to do e-commerce right there on the screen. So I mean, that means we're just a hop, skip, and a jump away from having that all happen automatically, and you actually being delivered an ad based on your personal presence being there. I come from the world of digital marketing, from the digital agency I ran, and I saw us going from very, very basic metadata all the way up to what Facebook is now currently able to offer. And in many senses, a lot of other networks that are able to offer similar granularity in the targeting. I think once we get down to the individual, we're actually able to target an individual. That starts to get very, very interesting. And I think that's going to fundamentally change advertising as we know it. Because I think we're no longer going to have broadcasted advertising. Every single ad will be unique, will be immersive, will be specifically for you. I think that we're very near to that. And I don't know how that's going to change. I don't know how that's actually going to change advertising. All I know is that advertising will change.
Yeah, it will be more pinpointed towards you and what you actually would like to have. So like what Google is doing with their search engine stuff and things like that, I guess. And there's this old saying, I think it was back in 1800s and 1900s, this big department store owner said that, "I know I'm using 50% of my advertising money wrong, but I don't know which 50% that is." So I think that's the one thing that AR can also solve with machine learning and AI, that you can actually provide greater value to customers and consumers.
Yeah, I think so. I think for those advertisers out there that might be listening, all those attribution issues that we have are going to start to go away. So attribution, for those that don't know, means how do we know that the ad actually made somebody do something, and how do we connect that back to that purchase, the ad purchase? And I think those problems are going to begin to go away with augmented reality. And I think you're actually going to have the opposite problem, which is you're going to be trying to catch the person in a specific moment. So it's not just going to be about the individual, but the individual in a specific moment in their life. And how do we value that moment in their life? So that's a very interesting type of challenge.
How do you see these future generations adapting this? I know that I'm the generation that has been between the old world and the internet. So I'm one of the last generations to live that. Everyone who was born in the 1990s, they haven't experienced time before internet. So how do you see this next generation of people that are, let's say born in 2000 or 2010, adapting this kind of things that, like I said, they don't necessarily appreciate physical things, but they might appreciate more creative things and having these kind of stories that are being told to them in a meaningful way. But do you see that's going to be the trend, that these future generations are the adapters of AR eventually?
Yeah. I think we're already seeing that it's the youth that are adapting this technology more quickly and deeper than other generations, and particularly people that are in high school and college age right now. They're just they're consuming at a completely different pace and completely different venues than other generations are. Even mine, and I'm in my mid-30s. I think as far as what this person might actually be affected, I think definitely we're going to see privacy being eroded, and that being somewhat accepted in society, that there's less of people's lives that are considered secret or private or otherwise not for public consumption. I think we're definitely going to see an erosion of that. where it becomes more common for people to live their life in public. I mean, truly in public, where they don't have almost no secrets, maybe just a bank account or something like that. Um, and then the other thing is, like I mentioned, if 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 you live in a world where some of the most valuable things are no longer physical things, meaning that you've got this virtual data, you've got this metadata and all your emails and texts and contacts and everything like that, and none of that is physical. It changes the way that you think about how you apply value to the world. And and particularly if we're replacing a lot of those physical items with augmented reality or virtual reality or digital products or digital items that still provide you functionality, I think it means people being a lot more ideologically focused and being a lot more focused on ideas, and not necessarily focused on things and materiality, and maybe not even so much on physical aesthetic, but what could be described in the future like digital aesthetic,
Yeah.
or I don't even know. I don't even know how to describe that. But you can begin to see that if you think about your Facebook friends or the friends that you have on social media, you think of them each having a certain character as a person who is online, as a person who is pushing out content with a digital presence, and that might be completely different from the way that they actually look. Meaning, they might be, you might have, a very good-looking friend, which doesn't necessarily have a good-looking digital presence, in one way to say it. And I think beginning to think about those types of ideological interactions, the way that I appear to other people. I mean, we're already seeing that as a huge thing. People considering, like, what do I post? Do I post political content? How extreme do I post my political content? That type of stuff. I think that's going to be much, much, much stronger in the generation that's coming.
Yeah, the whole digital presence, it's interesting, at least in the current generations. If you look at Instagram, for instance, people post their best moments in their life, and they give out this very polished picture of themselves. And like you said, the privacy, if it's gone, you people would really know that you're not always so happy, that you're not always doing so well, and life is not always full of rainbows and sunshines for you. So that's I think that's a move to a better world. But having privacy reduced, I think that's going to be a huge concern to many people, because people value their own space, so to speak.
I think there's definitely going to be a culture shock, particularly for people like me who are still going to be alive while these dramatic shifts are occurring. I mean, I can't imagine myself being a angry old man telling people to get off my lawn, but maybe I'll be telling them to get off my digital lawn or something. I don't know what that might be.
Yeah, that's true. How do you see these ethics and responsibilities going when you think about this advertisement and using AR in there? Who carries the responsibility when creating this AR content, for instance? And should the consumers be, or how they should be informed about the, let's say, driving factors that are not obvious to the consumer, that why they would want some product?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We're seeing a couple big privacy and liability concerns. One of them is when I was talking about world scale, which is like you have an entire map of the world, and then you have augmented reality or like digital events, hotspots that are strung out across this map. And then you have issues where people can alter this content. And let's say that somebody comes to the front of your house and alters the content that's there, and all of a sudden, like it has been in many cases, people are grouping there, doing things that maybe you don't want them to do on your property, that type of stuff. And who's actually liable for that? Is the game liable? Is the ecosystem liable? Is the person who put the content there liable? those types of things are getting very complicated. I think, especially since we are already in a world where multiple of these world scale AR platforms exist. So you might have a situation where you're fine on Pokemon Go, but on this newfangled thing that's coming out, like there's a huge palace right on top of your house or on top of your business, and people are going there constantly, and it's affecting your business either for the positive or negative. Yeah, who's responsible for that? I think that's such a weird problem, particularly when you start getting into weird things like what about defamation in those types of
Yeah.
instances where they say like, hey, this place sucks or whatever. What is my right as a business owner to delete an augmented reality sign in front of my business that says I suck? Like what? I think that so for business owners, it's going to start getting very, very weird and very interesting. I think that's one thing, as far as privacy and consent and all that type of stuff. And then there's also kind of like what I was talking about before with these kiosks that do facial ID. You start to get into that minority report space, right? Where have I actually consented to my face being ID'd, my profile being associated with my body essentially, or my presence. And yeah, I don't know. I think from an advertiser standpoint, you always want people to opt in, and I think that has been the strategy in the past. And I think that we've seen a breakdown of that type of strategy when people don't realize that they're opting in, and it's not clear, what they're opting in for, either because the verbiage isn't clear enough, or they just click. They just click yes, I agree, and then move on, and then later find out that they consented to something that they didn't actually want to have to happen.
Yeah, because the disclaimers are five pages long and no one reads them anyway. So
Yeah. I mean, there's been some attempts to solve that. I've seen some companies that are trying to simplify the disclaimer, trying to make them more jokey and readable, and I guess more of a humorous take on the disclaimers. But I think there's only so much that you can do there. I think that ultimately the industry, and I say this as somebody in this industry, we're going to have to think about coming up with a set of guidelines and self-regulation, very much like the MPAA, to figure out like, okay, maybe if you have opted in a few times and then you're an adult and everything like that, everything seems to be in the clear, then we can give you these types of experiences. Otherwise, there's got to be like an in-the-moment opt-in, and we've got to figure out things for children. I think that's a major concern as well, is like storing personal information about children, conceivably their images and the way that they look and everything like that. Like that starts to become into weird problems.
yeah,
But I think ultimately this is about people getting used to how these technologies are being used, and I think now people are more aware. Like I think that the average person now is more aware that when they sign their consent away by pressing I agree, there's going to be stuff that they're going to have to deal with later on that they might not expect. And I think that people don't like that, but at least they understand it.
yeah, and we touched about this, this digital presence. It sounds to me that there should be also at some point their own digital rights to be, actually made laws, so that you'd have separate rule sets when you work in a physical world as opposed to a digital world. I mean, that might well happen.
Yeah. I think that's super important, actually. I come from a background where the user should own their data. That's my philosophy. So I for 10 years I was kind of going, what the heck is going on here? On the internet, on social media, this is super weird and super unusual. That users aren't having access to their data, that I can't, download my data into a spreadsheet or something like that. I love this change, and I hope that it continues. And I really do think that if users have more control over their data, then these types of experiences that we're talking about can be much more powerful, and everybody's on the same page as far as the consent and privacy.
Yeah, definitely. We earlier talked about the actors, and I just came to mind what AR sort of like will require from actors and directors. I mean, I know that working in a green screen is very boring because you do not see anything. It's just a blank screen that you have in front of you. But how do you see that what AR sort of like requirements actors and directors need to follow in order to make it actually work? I think it's less than green screen acting because you get to interact with these AR components. But do you have any other pointers in there?
Yeah, so as far as what ARwall is doing, if people can imagine, basically behind the actor is a gigantic LED video wall. So very much like what you might see at a Beyonce concert behind the performers, a giant TV essentially. The difference is that the ones that we're using are very, very the pixel density is very tight, so you're not able to see the individual pixels or granularity or anything like that. So what that means that when the actor is performing, they can peek over their shoulder and look into the screen and have an idea of obviously the space that they're in, the size of that space, the time of day, the color, and all that stuff is stuff that they're guessing about on green screen. So to give you a sense of what it's like to act against green screen, which I have actually in college, it's very difficult. You're essentially being told by the director, there's a thing that you're looking at, and maybe they have one piece of concept art or style reference, and essentially you are guessing. You are kind of in your mind, like when you're a kid playing pretend, kind of going like, oh, here's the thing, I'm looking over there, everything like that. So it's very, very mentally taxing, and there's a lot of uncertainty. And let's say that you are, for example, like the script supervisor, and it's saying, this person needs to pick up a cup, then look over there, then look over there. And then you see them looking and looking, and you're like, well, how do you know that they looked right at the exact spot, right? Or that they put the thing at the exact. So it's not just actors, but it's also everybody else. What is the certainty that they have that X thing, happened, that the shot went perfectly well, or that they got the composition, whatever. So it's just uncertainty up and down the line. So for actors, I think we're doing a lot because they actually have something to look at. I think that's huge. And
you get more emotion in play, and it feels more authentic, I guess.
Yes, I mean that seems like such a simple thing, but like for people who aren't in the film industry and aren't used to doing green screen production, I think you would honestly be shocked at how rudimentary some of these productions are, where you literally have one actor with an entire scene of CG characters. So it's just them looking around for like a full minute and then saying one line. I mean, that's like what some of these shoots are. You can imagine it gets a little bit ridiculous. And it sometimes seems like a joke that we're putting on ourselves. But yeah, so when you change that, and you actually have something for them to look at, to react to. I mean, just knowing the size of the space sometimes can be huge, right? Knowing the level of tension, claustrophobia, or expanse that's in a space, I think can be very interesting. So we're seeing actors respond positively to it. Honestly, the first reaction that actors have is they look at it and they're hypnotized for about 5 minutes because they don't understand what's going on. Because the first time you see it, it is a little bit confusing because the perspective is fixed to the camera, not to you as an individual.
You're not looking in your own eyes.
Yes, you're not looking from your own perspective into the screen. So it looks a little bit distorted when it's moving to you. But when you see it from the camera's perspective, that's when it all clicks in. And then the actors, they peek behind them into the screen as if they're looking into a magic wall. They don't really understand what's going on, but they're like, oh, there it is. So we're seeing that as a huge positive as well. So yes, creative performance I think is a big one. But I also want to mention a little bit about doing this type of stuff for other types of AR and VR, because of course there's volume capture,
Yeah.
which a lot of actors are getting into now. There's a new place in LA that just opened, Metastage, which is doing very, very high quality, sophisticated volume capture. And
I'm not I'm unfamiliar what volume capture is and what it actually does.
Yeah, so volume capture means that you're taking a 3D scan of an actor or a space, or an object in video. So this is basically presumably 30 frames per second. Sometimes it can be higher.
Yep.
So that's what volume capture is. It basically means we're doing a 3D scan, capturing a 3D mesh of the person, and then all the color data of the surface, and then also doing that, again and again and again. So you actually get a video of them taking a specific action or doing something like that. So this is something that actors are now having to do as well. But again, this is often happening in a green screen stage with no reference. So we want to get ARwall into those types of volume capture studios as well. I think that there's a big synergy there.
Yeah, definitely. By the way, how's the tool production itself going for you guys? Do you have some venture capitalist money behind you or self-funded? How does it work?
Yeah. A lot has happened there. So we won the South by Southwest Accelerator, which I think I mentioned. And after that, we went, gosh, we need to go and give it a solid go at raising some financing. So we spent most of the spring and summer traveling around. I traveled to Silicon Valley, to Texas, to Canada, all over the dang place. And we finally closed a initial seed round last month. So we're very, very happy about that, and it's a huge accomplishment for us.
Yeah, that's definitely gets you going. One thing I've also been involved in many startups. One of the problem is that you always need to run for the money because you're not never making enough. You always need the venture capitalist money or some other financing in order to survive and get to the next step. So yeah, I feel your pain when you travel all over.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a hustle. And for those that don't know, the world of VC has gone pretty crazy. There's a lot more money floating out there. The numbers that people are talking about have increased by 10 probably over the last 2 years. But there's a lot of investors out there as well, who are interested in this space. So yeah, just be prepared for a lot of rejection. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, and I mean, also knowing which kind of VCs approach, they have all different kind of tactics and markets that they look into. So identifying them is also a huge importance when looking for that.
Yeah, if you're in the AR VR space, there is a list of investors that invest in AR VR that is floating around. And if you ask around in some of the Facebook groups or Reddits or stuff like that, you can usually find this spreadsheet.
Yeah, so you know who to approach. And how was when you created the pitch? How was it? Was it short and sweet, or you just demoed the ARwall by itself and used no slides?
Yeah, so I honed so what happens when you go to these pitch events? Of course, there's like pitching at an actual investor's office, which usually they give you about 15 minutes to do your pitch, and then there's like a 15-minute discussion afterwards. So like a full half hour that you get. But when you go to these pitch events, they squeeze you into all sorts of different shapes and sizes. So sometimes you are doing a 2-minute pitch, and then with like a 10-minute Q&A. Sometimes you're doing 5 minutes, 5-minute Q&A. So I had to come up with all of these. I had to come up with a 1-minute one, a 2-minute one, a 5-minute one, a 7-minute one, a 10-minute one, and a 15-minute one. So these are all.
Then you need to rehearse it all and get the pacing out there.
Yeah, and really the difficulty is that I'll have to do a 2 minute one, and then the next day I'll have to do a 10 minute one, and then I'll get confused between the two, because it contains a lot of the same information and slides, and I'll just be like, "What? Oh, I don't know what to say here." But
Yeah.
luckily, none of those big mess ups ever happened. I was very, very lucky. It did never had any horror story moments or anything like that.
When you look at the future of ARwall, do you see it touching people outside of movie industry and film industry at some point on an individual level, everyday level?
Yeah. So of course we're going to be in the movies and TV shows that people are watching, but beyond that, we are looking at uh, getting into location-based entertainment and experientials. So one of the ways that we've already done this is basically setting up video selfie booths. So this can be like a big TV or an LED, like an 8x8, or I guess you guys are metric. So like a 3 meter by 3 meter LED video wall, and something about that size, either like at red carpet events or pop-ups or malls or something like that. And basically, this would be a way to take a selfie against a virtual environment, kind of like it's a window into a virtual room that doesn't exist really. And we can do lots of interesting stuff there. So that might be the type of stuff that people begin to see us if they're going to these types of events, conventions and trade shows and that type of thing. And then beyond that, later this year, we're coming out with an interactive version of our product. So this is basically not for motion pictures, but for to track the perspective of individuals. So to give individuals this virtual window illusion with no headset, with interactivity. So what we're calling it is AR 3D, and we're saying it's got all the interactivity that one would expect out of a VR headset, but with no headset and no controllers. It's all using depth sensors. So
Okay.
using computer vision to track you optically, what you're doing and where you're looking and that type of thing.
Oh,
So people might begin to see that type of thing at retail locations, mall kiosks, and then in car dealerships is where we're getting the most amount of interest. Basically, for car customization, imagine like a big interactive wall where you customize your car, and maybe you take a little test drive on a virtual track afterwards. So something big and fun and kind of futuristic that invites other people to do the same thing. That's the type of stuff that where people might initially begin to touch our product. And I think beyond that, hey, there's no reason why we couldn't take that type of platform and get into the living room and start to offer more like gaming and productivity and things in the home that would be valuable to people.
yeah, definitely. If you remove any limitations, what would you do with AR if everything would be possible?
So one thing that people don't realize is if we're able to know where you're looking and where you're looking from, we can get rid of a lot of the hardware. And I think that if we had like an international initiative to put sensors everywhere, obviously this would be a huge undertaking from a hardware perspective. If we were to put sensors everywhere, in your home and then maybe in some key places outside in public spaces, we would be able to create illusions and huge augmented reality displays, very much like what you might imagine in Blade Runner and stuff like that. And I think the difference between our world and the Blade Runner world is that in that world, these sensors and these holographic displays are everywhere in public spaces, right? And I think that stuff is super, super interesting, because you can start to create collective stories, and that's something that is kind of the holy grail, is telling a story which is on a grand scale, but which is unique to each person and customized to each person from their perspective. That's really exciting. But but we can't get there in current methods because the consent of putting those sensors and displays everywhere would be huge. It would be a huge legal undertaking.
Yeah,
So that's the type of stuff that, yeah. I mean, that's what I'd be interested in. And then beyond that, I really want a holodeck. I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. So a holodeck from Star Trek, particularly, Next Generation and Voyager. If I can have one of those, that would be great.
then you reached the pinnacle. This is it, and I'm happy now.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I like that's maybe even the true drive here is if I can have one of those before I'm on my deathbed, I will be happy. But if I don't, if I've never be able to use the holodeck, I'll be super bummed out.
Well, I do hope that it will come in next 10 years or so. That was very interesting.
Yes, please.
This database of people that you would need to create in order to have this one big community of nearly 8 billion people having all their information in one database. And I definitely see that being risky and a huge amount of legal issues. But as a topic, that's quite intriguing, because eventually when you get people closer to each other and when they communicate with each other better, faster, and easier, a lot of the conflicts are taken out of the world and humanity in general. So yeah, it could actually do a lot of good. Of course, there's a huge downsides and misuse scenarios that can be, but altogether that would be an interesting idea to pursue.
I think that there's a lot to say about having collective stories that, because, quote unquote, everyone in the world can take part in. Being ways for us to come together and to see past our differences. I think if you look at the actual data since the creation of the World Wide Web or the internet in general, which is like what I guess 30 years or something like that. There's been less war, there's been less overall conflict, and I think maybe one of the reasons there is because we're actually seeing and communicating with more people from across the world. And I think AR is a continuation of that, conceivably. That just like you would have a telephone call with someone, you would have more of a holographic AR holo presence with that person and begin to actually share, the same types of spaces with them, which is where the step that we haven't made yet. And I think that's where the promise of AR is.
Yeah, and I'm definitely, when you think about helping people out, right here in Finland, we have now this fundraiser for starving children, and they always show these pictures on TV and whatnot. But if you actually would use AR in that kind of scenarios, I think that would definitely make people feel way more sympathetic, because it's more, tangible and it's more there.
Yeah, I'm actually going to give a plug there. There is a company that is already working on these types of stuff called Star VR. They did something recently. They're located here in LA. They did some. For those that don't know, these are the guys that developed Payday. They're now developing a VR company. They're creating experiences from war-torn scenes of people who are victims of bombings in Syria and that type of stuff. I was very lucky to be able to take part in one of these. And I think it proves out it was very effective. Basically, I was a victim of a barrel bomb from the Assad regime. It was very realistic. It was very poignant, and it really proved to me that AR and VR have the potential to be what's being called the empathy machine. To be a way to create empathy in a very quick and easy way that reaches normal people out in the normal world, for them to be able to empathize with people who are going through something that is completely beyond imagination. That's when that's really the power here. It is beyond imagination. Something can be happening that is so horrible, so unusual that it's beyond imagination. How do you jump over that hurdle? VR and AR are potentially a way to do that.
Yeah, I mean that's fantastic that people are doing that, because that has good meaning in everyone's lives, and you get more emotion in the play. That's definitely a great thing. And I think our hour is up. So if you want to tell us listeners where they can find more about you, more about ARwall, where to go, where to get in touch with you.
Absolutely. So if you want to learn more information about ARwall and our AR filmmaking tools, you can go to arwall.co. And if you want to follow us on social media, we're almost always ARwall Co. So you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and elsewhere.
Yeah. And by the way, any big announcements coming soon from you guys? Or still hush-hush?
Well, we just had this major announcement that we closed this financing round. I'll go ahead and give a plug to our investor, who is Dolphin Image. Dolphin Image is a new entertainment studio in the US and UK that's developing sci-fi and fantasy content. That's why they reached out to us and wanted to make this strategic partnership with us. So we're very excited to be working with their team. And we're going to be opening up 3 permanent locations for ARwall screens here in LA, in Central Florida, and then also in the UK. So that's the big announcement.
Yeah, that's good. And last, any advices or exercise for our listeners how to use AR properly in their life, how to get it more involved with that? Any good applications or stuff like that where they can see and feel what happens?
Yeah. So if you're a filmmaker, I really recommend you check out Blocker. It's a storyboarding tool using augmented reality characters developed by a company called After Now. Actually, our neighbors at our office and also competed with us at South by Southwest Accelerator. That's a really awesome one if you're a filmmaker and you want to get into augmented reality, but you don't necessarily have access or a project ready for ARwall. You can go ahead and start playing around with augmented reality using that tool Blocker.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you, Rene, and it was nice having you here. And I'm sure we can go around too at some point.
Oh, great! Thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
The future is here tomorrow. Join the discussion on our LinkedIn page, We Are Future Builders, and listen to more Future Builders podcast on wearefuturebuilders.com.